NC.
Hey, NC. Hope you're all doing well. How you doing today, Miss Jackson?
I'm all right.
Oh, good.
Little seasonal allergies. Again, with the complaining of the cold.
You know, it's like...
All right, enough of that.
I was just going to say, I think it's the weather. It's like 30 degrees at night, and it's got to be like 70.
I took Benadryl last night, so I'm out of it.
Okay.
How are you?
Not too bad. Drinking more coffee, trying to stay awake.
We're pitiful.
We're sad.
Oh, my God. Oh, so, okay, to get us out of our little complaining about our sicknesses rut, let's talk about what we were watching last night. Tales.
Oh, right. Tales from the Tour Bus.
Yeah. Gosh, I didn't know about Billy Joe's shaver.
Yeah, you know.
That was a really fun, interesting, funny, kind of a little bit of sad story with Billy Joe's shaver.
There's so many. I mean, first I want to encourage people to watch it if you can. It's the Mike Judge who did King of the Hill. And, you know, I didn't realize this. I mean, maybe I knew this to begin with, but Tammy Wynette was the voice of Hank Hill's mom.
Yes. Yes.
I couldn't remember that.
I knew that.
Yeah, I couldn't remember that. But they do there's like a 30-minute episode, and each episode is kind of on one particular, legendary country music artist, except there was a 2-part for, George and Tammy, because you need 2 parts. Yeah,
so the only ones I've seen are the Billy Joe shaver and the Johnny Paycheck ones.
Yes.
They're outlaw country at its best.
Or
right?
worst.
Or
maybe they're kind of the same.
I don't know. To be an outlaw, you kind of got to be an outlaw. You got to play the part. They really
Billy
did.
Joe
They were
shaver
true blue
one.
to the outlaw.
So far, now a lot of my friends said they'll really catch it. John and Dave said, "Oh yeah, the one that really summed it all up for me was the Johnny Paycheck one." I'm going with Billy Joe Shaver now.
Oh my God! Like everything has happened to him, both good and bad.
So many stories and to pick from, but the one that still sticks in my mind is how he sawed off. I think it was 3 of his fingers, 2.5. I don't know.
Maybe 2.5.
Yeah. And he gets in his truck, drives to the doctor, and starts telling the doctor that they could sew on your fingers. He read this thing about this article, they could do it in Japan. He goes, "This is Waco.
Not Japan."
And then he decides, after the woman, the nurse puts his fingers in a mason jar full of formaldehyde, that he had it in so he could hit on her. That,
Yeah, I like that he took the time to make a comment that she was real pretty. Yeah.
It's like,
I don't know, my favorite story, I mean, there were several that he had, but was him sneaking out of the house when he was a kid, barefoot, walking on like train tracks to get to this juke joint, kind of honky tonk, shack or whatever. And he climbs, it's a lot of people. He climbs up on a pole so he can get a good view. And there's Hank Williams Sr. singing to him, and he's like, he sung right to me.
yeah.
I bet if you were climbed up on a pole, you'd get sung to.
then getting home, and he said his grandma beat him half to death for sneaking out. That was good. Yeah, they were just all great. Yeah. And that sort of leads me to the thing I want to talk about today too, or, out here in podcast land, we're sort of researching some of this stuff and just sort of finding some stuff that we like and how we want to do our podcast. Again, another friend of ours mentioned this podcast called Cocaine and Rhinestones. And if you're into the classic country and the stories behind it, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's good.
David Allan Coe's son, Tyler Mahanco, I think. Yeah. I wonder if there's going to be a story about that.
Yeah. He did the one, I think we heard the one on Loretta Lynn. That was really good.
It's amazing, yeah.
Her doing the song The Pill, which
Pill.
I thought she wrote, and she didn't write it.
Yeah, and it was recorded like 3 years before it came out.
Right, yeah.
So it was... They're all great. So for those of you looking to get your country music on, specific classic country, I think would be the way to put it. No, so far, I don't think there's going to be any George Strait
It's
episodes.
like the dark side. It's totally the outlaw to the country, even if you aren't considered.
Yeah. The what was it? The new one that's out, the podcast that's out, for Cocaine and Rhinestones. The new episode was the Leuven brothers,
Oh, yeah.
and that's something.
Yeah.
So but so who do we have coming on today?
Oh my God, we've got State Senator Valerie Foushee. I adore her. She's awesome. She has a long career in state senate as well as in Orange County politics. She worked at the Chapel Hill Police Department for like 30 or 40 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So she's basically serving the state of North Carolina in her retirement, which is awesome.
Great.
She talks about how she's got. I've heard her talk about how she just has a heart for service, and I think that's beautiful. And I'm excited for other people to hear her voice, hear her story. Also, get inspired. She definitely inspires me.
Now, you've worked with her before on some stuff, haven't you?
Well, when I served on the Orange County Arts Commission and the Orange County Commission for Women, she was, I believe she was a chair of the Orange County Commissioners. I think she's been a lot of firsts in terms of both being a woman and a woman of color. So she's definitely broken some glass ceilings and paved the way for getting women and women of color a seat at the table. So, yeah.
So that do you know what you're going to ask her?
I don't. I need to prepare. I do have some questions that I want to ask her. But yeah, I'm just she's easy to talk to. She's very approachable. I kind of feel like we'll just have a nice conversation. Hopefully she'll give us some direction on what we need to do to help North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited to hear about that and
hear about what committee she serves on.
Just the whole process, because I know that she's starting to get ready for her next run. And just sort of how that process is. And, the one thing I've noticed is as people are gearing up and for the next election cycle is the amount of fundraising and the dollars that go in and just sort of how much time they must have to spend, talking to, potential donors and reaching out to try and get people to sort of either volunteer or, donate some cash. That seems to me just exhausting. It's a necessary part, but sometimes I wonder how necessary it is in terms of competing, because gosh, there's so much money involved in politics, and it would be, at least to my perspective, nice if people focused more on, I don't know, the message than as opposed to the clever ads or something like that. But I'm talking more on a national scale for that. But all right, well, we're going to have Valerie on, and it is going to be awesome. All right, we're here with Senator Valerie Foushee, also known as Valerie.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We've been really looking forward to this, and we just kind of wanted to talk a little bit. And can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you came to become a state senator?
Sure, Phil. So I grew up here in Chapel Hill, was born and raised here, graduated from Chapel Hill High, went to UNC, met my childhood sweetheart, who is now my husband for almost 40 years.
Wow.
We will celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary on Christmas Eve. We have attended church together. We went to school together. And so for most of my life, I've known him. I think most people who know anything about me know that I grew up here of very meager means. My parents were high school dropouts. And so you can imagine the kind of employment that they had, but suffice it to say that they were very hard workers. Both of them worked 2 or more jobs until my mom passed away and my dad became disabled because of diabetes. He was an amputee. But what they instilled in us was, love for God and family, and to work hard and to not make excuses. So, having grown up here in a university town, all my life I aspired to go to UNC. So when I was in high school, I didn't apply to any other school but UNC. So thank God that I was accepted and had the opportunity to go there. But, like I said, most of my life has been lived in Chapel Hill and all of my life in Orange County. And I've been enriched by living here.
What do you
this
love so
place
much
made
about?
me, well, it made me who I am. Things were not always as I would have wanted them to be, because I did grow up during segregation in Chapel Hill, but I learned a lot from those experiences. I've learned not to discriminate. I learned how to appreciate everybody for the good that is in them. And I learned service. I think I probably learned service more through my family and my church. But I believe that all of us are given something and we have an obligation to give back. I got in politics basically from being involved in my children's lives. So you know what that's like. And to have 2 young boys who are energetic and enthusiastic about just about everything, going to school and just watching them have their own associations, making their own friends, developing into who they were, was just fun to watch. But along with that, I'm reading research about what happens to African American children in schools, in public schools, even if, they start out on what you believe is a level playing field. They're in the same class with the same teachers as other kids, but something, the literature said to me that something happens to young Black boys in grade 4.
Oh, yeah. What was the...
And where they can be going
literature?
this way until grade 4, they start to drop off. And so my goal was to make sure that I did everything that I could to see to it that that didn't happen to my kids. So I was an involved parent. I was in schools a lot, and I think I contributed. And so there were parents who, when there were vacancies on the school board for the coming 97 election, there were folk who urged me to run for a seat. And so I did, and was elected in 97 and reelected in 4 years. So that would have been 2001. And I think of all of the public service I've done, being a school board member was my favorite. Because, there's nothing that's going to be greater that you do that's more important than impacting the life of a young person. And so being a policymaker to make sure, to the extent possible, that every kid was getting the best that he or she could so that he or she could realize their potential. Being on that side of things was exciting. And I will tell you that the culmination of that work is sitting on stage at a high school graduation. And watching those kids, some of which you've known since they were kids, or you have met at a basketball game or a football game or at a play, or for our school board, we recognize students once a month. And then to see those students become young adults, and watching how optimistic they are and how excited they are about the rest of their lives. And you're sitting there in your chair smiling, knowing, you have no idea. but there's something about that that's really great. My move to the Orange County Commission had more to do with the local funding for public schools and wanting to ensure that the county was doing what it could for both districts. Certainly, I knew more about the Chapel Hill Carborough School District than the Orange County one, but I knew that they were two good school districts. I knew from my terms on the board, how people in this community feel about education. This is an education community. And so to be a part of ensuring that funding was adequate was important to me. At the same time, having grown up here and having the dream that most Americans had at that time, certainly times have changed, of home ownership and not being able to own a home myself, my husband and I, affordable housing was huge for me. And so that was one of the tenets of my platform, that we needed to do what we could to ensure that there was a reasonable stock of affordable housing so that people who work here could live here.
Absolutely.
So, those things. And then just understanding the landscape or the makeup of Orange County is interesting that this stuff is coming back to me. I had not been a person to, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, because I was concerned about other things. I really didn't have a lot of knowledge about our environment. But I learned quickly as an employee of the town of Chapel Hill, just in what we were doing in terms of land use planning. And I learned about our water issues. So understanding and having done the campaigning all over Orange County and understanding or at least trying to understand what it meant for people who lived off of their land, not having come from that background, and understanding how land use policies determine what you can and cannot do. That was important to me. So those issues drove me to consider a run for the county commission. And as you know, I was elected to the commission in 2004. During that time, as I guess a piggyback from having met a number of rural residents and a number of them approaching the commission about the makeup of the board, and that they didn't feel that the current makeup of the board at that time represented people who had those issues. And so they wanted us to explore a way that they could have a seat at the table. Commissioner Carey and I listened to them, and I'm not suggesting to you that the other three members didn't, but what I am saying is that we were the two commissioners who followed through on that request. If I recall correctly, and it's interesting how this is coming back to me now during this conversation, the petition that was presented to us had 1,200 signatures from rural Orange County. That's huge.
That is,
So we were away at a conference in D.C., and we shared a taxi to a meeting there, and we talked about what we should do with that request. And we both agreed that we should present it and that the board should explore how we were represented or how the constituents are represented. And so, long story short, that's how the county came to two districts representation.
Oh, okay.
So we have
District 1 and
three,
District 2.
right, 3 members from District 1, 2 members from District 2, and then 2 at-large members. That's the current composition of the board as it is elected. And so each member has to live in the district in which they run in a primary. But the general election, everybody votes on those seats. So, and I think the board is currently discussing how that might be changed or tweaked. But at least it gave the opportunity for people who live in Northern Orange County to serve on the board. So I'm pretty proud of that. I think we passed that in 2005 or 6. Commissioner Carey and I pushed for that to begin in 2008 when our seats would be up for re-election.
Oh, okay.
So we had we stood the most to lose from that. But Commissioner Carey decided to not seek re-election. Actually, he ran in a primary for the state Senate, and I ran unopposed.
Do you think that gave you extra credibility, the fact that you had the most to lose in terms of the redistricting of Orange County?
No, actually, I think that probably people were not aware that there were 2 districts.
Okay.
That was the first time, and I don't know whether I think that there were only 2 people who filed for District 1. That was myself and Pam Heminger.
Okay.
And both of us ran unopposed.
Oh, all right.
I tend to think that it had a lot to do with a new way of doing things, and people weren't quite sure what was going on. I think I benefited from it, but I don't think it's from anything that I did personally.
I don't think people realize just how big Orange County is.
Exactly.
Because when we lived in Mebane, everybody would just assume, oh, you're in Alamance County. And it's like, no, we're in Orange County. We're on the very limits, outer limits of it. But we are right there at Eflin.
That's right.
We were part of a historically Black community there.
That's right.
At
Eflin Sheiks.
the AME churches. That's where I would go for Orange County Democratic meetings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then also being from Danville, driving up 86, you hit the other part of Orange County. And
that's
it's
right,
just,
before you get into Caswell.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I guess a rather large public perception when you say Orange County. It's like Chapel Hill, Carborough.
And Hillsborough.
And Hillsborough.
But it's vast.
It's vast.
It's beautiful.
And it's
country.
beautiful.
Right.
It is. It really is.
Absolutely. So much pastoral.
Yes. Yes. That's what makes it so endearing.
And it makes me proud.
Yeah.
Too.
Now, you were also, you worked for the Chapel Hill Police Department for 30 years?
No, 21.
21.
Close to 22. But I did retire. Chapel Hill has a policy whereby, and I think this is probably pretty much local government in North Carolina, but at 50 and 20 years, you can do early retirement. So I did early retirement after 21 and a half years.
What was it like working for the police department, especially at the beginning? I mean, given
best job I ever.
Oh, really? Because given the conflicted or the troubled history, I guess, in the South of the African American community and the police, that must have been quite a journey.
Well, by the time I got to the Chapel Hill Police Department, I think a lot of those issues had been resolved to the extent that there were police officers who grew up in Chapel Hill.
Okay.
Who were employees and had connections with the community, who were trusted in the community. It had a different feel for me. And what you may not know is that my husband's grandfather was the first African American to be hired for the Chapel Hill Police Department.
Wow.
Jeff Foushee, who was hired in the 50s. And that's a part of my husband's family history, now mine, because he's my husband.
Right.
But there were a number of African Americans who were at the police department when I joined, there that I was familiar with. They went to church with me and others, so we knew them. We had, and then I have to say that policing in Chapel Hill during my tenure was not like what I knew when I was younger.
Okay.
And so there was, I guess you could say that it had a lot to do with when President Clinton did the initiative for the COPS grants, and community policing became huge. We were on the forefront of that. And the whole idea of establishing a relationship with members of the community so that there was trust was important to us. Now, certainly that's not to say that everything was rosy, because there were some things that we engaged in that I didn't agree with. And certainly the community didn't agree with. But I think the department was learning some things. There was a roundup at one point on Graham Street where the police department set up a perimeter, and everybody who was caught in that perimeter was treated as if he or she was a criminal.
And it's
it was like we did something like something you saw on TV with police officers in like moving vans in riot gear, and they surrounded
Swooped
the area,
in,
and then they
everybody
swooped in. They came out of trucks.
And up there on Graham Street, that's not near the university, so that's a totally different demographic.
Right. And so there was drug activity in that area. And in an effort to eradicate that, this was what we came up with. We had consulted with law enforcement experts, how to do this, and this was the idea. Now that I'm ashamed of that, but that's what we did. But we learned from it. And I think what we've seen afterwards. I mean, there were some situations where we had some police officers who didn't follow the Chapel Hill way. And I think that we found ways to, part ways with those folk. My sons had friends who I thought were treated unfairly by the police, and I think that some of those officers treated them that way because of the color of their skin. There's no doubt in my mind. I always was afraid when my sons were old enough to drive. I don't mind telling you, I was afraid of what might happen to them before they got home, if they had an encounter. And so my husband and I did our best to teach them how to behave if they were stopped for any reason. That if you're not guilty of something, don't act like you're guilty. Don't let anybody make you feel like you're guilty. If you're stopped by the police, then you answer their questions. Don't believe this stuff. You don't have to tell them who you are. Yes, you do. Tell them exactly who you are. Be respectful. Look them eye to eye. Extend your hand to shake their hand. Do all of that. The rest of it we'll deal with, whatever it is. But it was imperative to us that they learned how to not put themselves in situations where they were likely to be mistreated or hurt.
Yeah. It's so sad though that I feel like I have this conversation with some friends of mine who are Black mothers, and the things, just the toys that I buy my children that I don't think about, Nerf guns. They do not buy Nerf guns. hoodies. I can't tell you how many hoodies my kids have.
Sure.
No hoodies. I mean, it's just like, it's so sad that we as mothers have to raise our children differently.
Mm-hmm.
And because I just think there's this whole thing that, not all mothers understand. And
Sure.
just hearing that these are their concerns.
Sure.
It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just concerned about basic stuff. Are you socializing? Are you learning? Are you being respectful? I mean, I think that's
right.
Yeah, but it's just
Well,
sad
it's
that you
interesting
have to
you should say
kinda-
that because one of my colleagues at work, our sons were about the same age. My oldest son was older than her sons, and my youngest son was younger than hers. And so we used to compare notes. And I remember her telling me one day after we talked about this, how sad she thought that was just not something that instinctively she felt that she had to say to her kids. But she understood why I felt that I had to say those things to mine. And so, but again, I have to be fair to say that I was promoted more often than I ever would have imagined at the police department. I was put in positions of authority where I had the ability to influence policy. I felt that my seat at the table, that this was not yet another conference room where everybody in the room looked like everybody else. And so everybody in the room was making decisions for people who did not look or think like them all the time. And so I was one of those persons. I was the first African American person to have that position. And then shortly after, a captain, an African American police captain, also became a member of the chief's cabinet. And so we were a part of the decision-making process. And so there was not in our minds this image of yet another conference room where all of the people looked alike and they made decisions for other folk. So I give credit to the department for that. And for seeing.
You also worked very hard.
I did.
I mean, I remember you talking about you studied at night, raising kids. You studied all of the legal and what they were talking about to be able to have that seat at the table. So it came with a lot of your hard work.
Absolutely.
And you achieved a lot of firsts. Not just for women of color, but for women. Sure. And that's amazing. Yeah.
So how did you decide that you wanted to run for state senator?
Didn't decide that.
Okay, how did that happen?
Let's say this. Senator, yes, but not the GA, not the General Assembly. So that was weird. I will say that I had, after serving 2 terms on the school board and approaching the end of my second term on the commission, I don't mind telling you, as I've told others, that I believe that everybody has an era, a time frame. Some people can do things longer than others. I respect and appreciate that. But for myself, I think that for me, I believe that there has to be turnover every so often. And I had already made the decision not to seek re-election to the commission. My husband and I had gone to we had gone to a funeral for one of his cousins in D.C. at the time when the current representative for District 50, who was Bill Faison, had decided that he was not going to seek re-election to his seat, but he was going to run in a primary for governor. And so when we came home from D.C. 2 days later, I had 28 voicemail messages
Uh-oh.
saying that you should consider running in this race. We know you're not going to run for county commission, but will you consider? And some requests to meet and talk about how that might happen. And after a lot of prayer, and then some more prayer, some discussions with my family and others, we decided that we would file for that primary. And I will say to you that I thought that there were others who were interested in that seat, and in my opinion, would have made better representatives. I don't mind saying
Really?
that.
Why do you say that?
Because, for one thing, I knew some folk who were interested in serving in the General Assembly and who were preparing themselves to serve in the General Assembly. And I just feel I have this notion that if you're going to serve in a public office, you need to have fire in your belly to do it. Yeah. There has to be certainty. And this has to be something you want because it's going to be tough. Yeah. And so if you're going to be wimpy about it.
No half measures, huh?
Okay. So at the time I was wimpy.
Okay.
Okay, I might. And then, so my thing was, it's not a place for Democrats right now.
You're sort of dipping your toe in the water just a teeny bit, huh?
Yeah, and so the person to whom I was going to yield, and I had already told that person that I would support him if he decided to do it. So he said, well, let me have a couple of days. And I said, sure. So 2 days later, he called me back. He said, I don't want it.
Huh. Who was it?
I probably shouldn't say.
Okay. So why did this person decide not to do it?
He talked to his wife, and I think that, they decided that.
Wasn't it worth it? At
least it wasn't for him at that time. Let's say that.
Yeah. It seems like it's uphill both ways.
And so after that, I talked to some other folk, and they said, well, no, not interested. And I really couldn't believe that nobody else was interested.
Well, they probably thought, ooh, Valerie is running.
Maybe not. So I did. So I decided to file. And then, so District 50 was composed of Northern Orange County and Northern Durham County.
All right.
So there was a primary. My primary opponent was from Durham County. He was a young guy who was, if I recall correctly, he was still at community college. And so we had a primary.
That must have been kind of exciting in some ways.
It wasn't.
It wasn't? Why not? Was it miserable? Were you miserable doing it? Or?
So let me say this. This young fella, who I think was a fine young fella, a nice guy, ran in a Democratic primary. He was a registered Democrat, but he was a conservative.
All right.
And he was close to, in my opinion, an alt-right conservative.
Oh.
All right.
He had been, as he said, I've been registered Democrat since I was 18. He was about 22 then. And he told me afterwards why he was a registered Democrat. And I would imagine that there are other conservatives who are registered Democrats for the same reason. But he was very respectful of me, but some of the rhetoric that was used at forums where they were not just for the Democrats running in that race, but also the Republican primary.
Okay.
And so even though as a commissioner, you have to declare your party affiliation because Orange County is what it is, I had never encountered situations where I heard that kind of rhetoric in public.
About being a Democrat?
No. Oh. About conservative values.
Oh, okay.
So at forums, at that time, Amendment 1 was the issue.
Oh,
right.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, I remember Amendment 1.
Okay, so we're talking 2012.
Yeah.
And so being in forums, hearing folk talk about people in that manner. People who would have benefited from Amendment 1 not being passed. And to hear people describe people as going to hell, that kind of thing. And, and how, let's just be clear, I'm Christian and I am as tied to my faith as anybody. But the God I serve is a God of love. And there's nothing that I've ever read in my Bible that would suggest that God is a God of hate, and certainly Christ was not.
Right.
And so just listening to people commingle religion and hate speech in the same. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't ready for that. And it was difficult for me to not show my feelings by the expressions on my face. And as somebody said, my body language, sitting at those tables where
I love it.
You were uncomfortable,
yeah. So that was different. Yeah. But I'm glad I did it. I was happy to win that election because if you recall, the general election, I did run against a pastor and a very popular pastor in Orange County.
A conservative pastor.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm Christian as well, and I actually went to church with James one time, and I've gone to Episcopalian churches, and yes, it's always not even the sort of value of love versus hate, but church and state.
Yeah,
there
exactly.
seems to be a line that continually gets blurred to advance social agendas. So once you got there to the General Assembly, what did you have an idea of how you wanted to serve?
Like
what committees?
I did. So not so much committees other than education. So I had this thing. I made myself believe that because I had been a commissioner for 8 years, that I had made friends and alliances with commissioners all across the state, that liberal and conservative, or progressive and conservative commissioners across the state came together for uniting to put across an agenda for all 100 counties. And we did that so well. I will tell you that the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners did that very well. We not only put party aside, but we put personal feelings about people aside, because our goal was to put forward an agenda, a unified agenda, to present not only to state government, but to the federal government, to show that we were united in knowing what worked best for counties. And so we did that. Having this understanding that we could do that, that we could put people above parties. I said, okay. And I knew some other commissioners who had gotten elected in the same year. And so I knew them. I said, okay, so this may not be easy, but I think we can do some bipartisan stuff because I know these commissioners. It was very disappointing to be in the General Assembly for maybe all of 3 weeks to find out that these same people with whom I had worked for 8 years were not willing to do
what do you think the change in attitude is?
The change in attitude is that Republicans do believe in towing the party line, and they believe in keeping everybody else in check. Now, I'm not saying that that Democrats should do that, because I think that people represent constituencies. And so if you're elected to an office to represent folk, now surely, the debate comes back to me that, well, you were elected, so you have to make the decisions. Well, that's true, but my decisions should be based on what I'm hearing from the people whom I represent,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, because you're not going to get the same thing from everybody. But to be sure, you represent an area like Orange or Chatham counties, you have a pretty good idea what the values are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were elected because you have shared values.
Yep.
That's not the case in a lot of situations. And I don't think that Republicans own that any more so than we do as Democrats. But what I do believe is that over the years, as Democrats have been in power, Republicans were formulating a game plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I agree with that.
And they supported people who believed in the game plan.
Mm-hmm.
And they supported people who believed that the victory belonged to the party.
Right.
And you have to help the party achieve the victory.
Right.
And so they play by
just
those
fall in
strategies.
line.
They fall in
Yeah.
line. I mean, I've had people to tell me that, I may not have agreed with this, but,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think we've seen instances where people who didn't exactly toe the party line suffered for it.
Mm-hmm.
They do seem capable of enforcing a really strict discipline through
Absolutely.
Reward or punishments.
Correct.
The thing that is interesting with the way you talk about the representation is clearly, you need to be a voice of your constituency. I'm not sure, obviously versus Orange County versus say somewhere down east. Just because you represent your constituency, I'm not sure if I would go so far as say you need to agree with them on everything.
No, you can't, because all of your constituents don't agree.
Right.
But what I am saying is that two things. What I am saying is that you got elected by that constituency because they believe you have shared values.
Right.
When the question is called in whatever chamber, surely you have to vote your conscience because you live with you.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand that if you are not voting as your constituents would want you to vote, your term in office is going to be short-lived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And perhaps in some way, you have either led people to believe that you believe one way, or they misconstrued or misunderstood something in your platform, or the speeches you made, or the lunches you had with them, or the coffees or teas, because they thought you were the person. If your values are that different, if they're vastly different from your constituency, then something is out of kilter, Phil.
You're not representing them. You're not their voice.
You're not the voice of that electorate. I don't. There's there have been at least 3 votes that I've taken that I would imagine that the people who elected me because of our shared values were probably disappointed that I took those votes. Let's be clear. But that's 3 out of the many. For the most part, I am voting those values. Those votes that I took that caused me some personal consternation had to do with what we needed to do in a bipartisan effort to make a bill less bad.
Okay.
Because there is that.
Right. Yeah.
You have to be practical.
You have to be practical. If a piece of legislation comes up for a vote, if it's being considered in committee, and you understand that that is not going to be what's in the best interest of your constituents, nor do you believe it's in the best interest of most North Carolinians, then the only thing that we have left right now with supermajorities is to be able to go to perhaps the sponsor of that bill to say, it's hard for me to vote for this, but, I'm hearing from my folk that if perhaps we could have a provision that says this, or if perhaps we can eliminate this section or this line, they could be okay.
Right.
And if that person says to you, well, Senator Foushee, I'm really not interested in changing this bill. And why should I change it? I have the votes to pass it.
Right.
If I change it, are you going to vote for it? Now, what do? Do I say, no, I'm not going to vote for it? Because if I say no, then why would he or she change it? They already have the votes.
Right.
But then I have to put my people in front of what's going. If it's going to be something that's going to help the folk who are represented by me, if this is changed, then then I might have to say, yes, I'll vote for it. And the sad thing about that is if we only get 2 or 3 people from our side to do that, the Republicans still get to say that this was a bipartisan bill when actually it wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
However, it made it less bad.
Right.
If you have a bill that comes up that says, basically, we had this bill about, it was about receiving Medicaid benefits and who could receive them. And if this occurred or that occurred, you were not eligible. So some of us said, okay, we're not voting for this.
Right.
But we knew it was going to pass.
Yeah.
So you go to the sponsor of this bill and you say, I can't vote for this bill, but have you considered the fact that if these persons are not eligible for this benefit for food stamps or whatever, how are their children going to eat?
Yeah.
If the parents are no longer, food stamps don't go to children.
Right.
They go to the parents.
Right.
So if you say that this parent is no longer eligible because he or she failed a drug screen or whatever, so what does that mean for
really
those?
hurting.
You're hurting the children.
Yeah.
And so if that author says to you that if we change the language such that no child who currently qualifies for this benefit will lose it because of that, will you vote for the bill? Yes, Phil, I'm going to vote for that bill.
Yeah. It's like pick your evils, right? At least you're improving it to make it
And so with
accessible.
supermajorities, about the only thing we can do is to make legislation less bad because we're not going to get anything passed with our names on it.
What committees are you on?
So
Down there on the GA.
I am on 5 standing committees and about that many non-standing committees. I am on education and higher ed. I'm on commerce and insurance, healthcare, state and local government, and appropriations for justice and public safety.
Nice.
Those are my standing committees. I took a glance because they just changed. Before I had 9 committees.
Oh my goodness.
I had 9.
Wow, that's a lot.
And so what happened over the last session is that on the Senate side, we combined committees. And so we have fewer, but non-standing committees. And one of them I'm very proud to be a member of is the Joint Legislative Task Force on Education Finance Reform. That task force came out of a bill that I sponsored to have the legislature to look at school finance. Certainly, the method that we have in place is antiquated. Schools are not run the way they were run 20 years ago. There are specific needs in schools that were not considered when the previous legislation was written. And where my bill did not go anywhere, the bill showed up as a provision in the budget. And so I am a member of that task force. Actually, from the Senate, I am the only Democratic member of that joint legislative task force. So
I love how
I'm
education
proud of
is
that.
still very much your powerhouse in the General Assembly. What I had a question, like what is going on that is not on people's radars and is not publicized but should be? Is there anything? I mean, I know like if somebody doesn't read the paper, but it's like, hey, keep your radar up for this.
So there are a number of them, but I'll tell you one, for instance, that's really important. So I think just about everybody knows now, if you watch the news, that Duke Energy is asking for a rate increase so that they can have ratepayers pay for the coal ash cleanup. When that legislation was passed and through those negotiations, it was deemed that ratepayers would not have to pay for the cleanup.
That's some chutzpah.
Yeah,
I know, right? And so right now they are, appearing before the Utilities Commission for this consideration. Well, the Utilities Commission is composed of at least one person who should no longer be on that commission.
Due to conflict of interest?
No, because it's time for that person to come off.
Their term has expired.
The term has expired. Governor Cooper should have been able to make that appointment to that commission, but the General Assembly has not considered any of his appointees.
They're stalling it, right?
Right. And so that's the kind of thing that is happening broadly in the General Assembly, because Governor Cooper is not being able to appoint people to these commissions as other governors have. And so that, that's what happens when there are supermajorities and there are no negotiations to ensure that the people's interests are being served. The Utilities Commission is not the only commission. There are other boards and commissions that he's not able to make those appointments because the General Assembly won't approve them.
They tied his hands.
Exactly.
Yeah. What can we do to flip this thing?
Well, the first thing is that we have to pretty much wait until we know what the districts look like. That should be known pretty soon. December 1st is when the special master has to present before the 3-judge panel. We expect that something will happen early January. Hopefully, we won't have more court situations whereby this drags out. What we do know is that we will not be operating under the maps that we operated under in 2016. Once these districts are confirmed, we need to make sure that we have good candidates who can win in these fairer districts.
Yes.
And then we have to resource them.
Yes.
Because unlocking the governor's veto is going to make a huge difference in legislation that is going to be passed in 2018.
Absolutely.
So when we talk
beyond.
When we talk about resourcing, we're talking about
money.
Money and volunteers, or money?
Money and volunteers. We have to have a ground game.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that we have people who are willing to knock on doors, people who are willing to make the phone calls, to understand that we need to make sure that every eligible voter gets to the polls, and that person votes, and that person votes from information that will lead them to make the right choices in the ballot box.
I love that term, ground game. Yes. Got to have some ground game.
Absolutely.
So this leads me to my next question, which is 2018 is a coming.
2018 is a coming, and I am running.
You are running? You are official?
I am running, absolutely.
So that was one thing. Shannon and I have attended some fundraisers and seen those. What is your view about money in politics?
I hate that it has such a dominant force on elections.
Yeah.
The truth is that federal legislation has enabled money to be such an important factor of getting your message out.
And you're referring to the Citizens United decision?
I am. And so the truth is, in certain districts, fortunately, at this point, that is not the case here. But in those districts, Phil, where television airtime is so important, people who cannot raise the kind of funding that we're able to raise in Orange, Durham, Wake, or Mecklenburg County, if the money is not there such that they can have a message that's heard, you can get your message out in a number of ways, which is why the ground game is so important. Because if you and I are in the same race, and you have the money to be on TV regularly, and I don't.
Right.
But I have the ground game to have volunteers who are willing to go do the door knockings, to do the phone calls, to share information, to be able to get into neighborhoods and have community teas or coffees where you can talk to people and get a message out to them that resonates. Then that's just as important as money if you can find people who are not so busy that they can do that.
Yeah.
And they can do that with the kind of energy and time that makes it just as effective as radio and TV announcements. But, I remember near the end of 2016, that election period, if you turn on your TV anytime between 5:30 and 8, it's one political commercial after the other.
Yeah.
Almost sickening to where you want to turn the TV off.
Oh, it was on YouTube, too.
It was on everything.
Oh, my gosh.
It was on everything. So, or Facebook.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So if you don't have the resources to do that, people, if they're not taking the time to learn about the candidates in particular, then they just remember whose name they see or hear the most.
Oh, yeah. Or their friend or family. And it's like you don't really know what they're about or what their voice is.
People walk into the ballot box and they go, oh, yeah, I recognize that name.
And so I hate the fundraising piece. I don't think I do it particularly well. I don't do it as often as other folk in this area. It's because something stops right here. There's a gurgle every time I get ready to dial. And I know that there are people out there who support me and who are willing to donate to my campaign. I get that. And those people do.
Right.
And it's easier calling them than calling some other folk who say,
yeah.
I've already given to this candidate. And I get that. I respect that. But after you get about 5 of those, it's kind of hard to dial that 6th number.
Yeah.
And so you say, I'll put this off another day. And then the next day you say, I'm going to make calls from 4 to 6. And at 4 o'clock you say, no, I'm going to wash the dishes.
Yeah, when the dishes become more, Now, oh, hey, this sideboard is kind of dirty. I think I'll scrub that.
I think I'll do that now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. I really do need to check on
anything else but.
I will find anything else but until my folk get to me and they say, Senator Foushee, you need to make the call.
Turn it up.
And so then I turn it up.
No, I have a friend who shall remain nameless who is in the NCGA, and we're talking about he was going to go out and do some stuff out in the state. And he said, I could stand someone to help me drive. I said, well, you got 2 legs. What are you talking about here? You can drive. He goes, no, I need someone to drive while I'm calling.
Yeah,
I dialing for dollars.
I know that friend. That friend dials for dollars all the time, and some folk are good at it. And some folks see it as a necessary evil without which they can't achieve their goals. I see it that way, but I also see that if I only need what I need, my goal in my fundraising is like that, friends. It's more about being able to resource other candidates now. I think I have sufficient materials to start my campaign. I'll have the opportunity to, as I move forward, to see what other resources I need. But my goal is to help other Senate Dems who are, candidates for the Democratic Senate to get in to those seats. And so what I've done is to go to other parts of the state to talk to folk too, and to raise those funds. It's just not as easy. And, I believe it or not, there's some folk who just don't believe in that. And I mean, I respect that too. I'll say to them, they say, well, do you really think you're going to have that hard a time? I say, I really don't know. And I won't know until the primary.
Right.
However, this is about us being able to win in other districts because we need to increase our numbers.
Absolutely.
Certainly, I want to be reelected, but I want to be reelected to a Senate Democratic caucus that has at least 21 members.
Right.
And so other folk, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to give to other candidates.
Yeah.
And I respect that. So I just say, well, go ahead and give to me, please. And thank you.
You can't.
Please and thank you.
Well, what would you say to someone who doesn't know anything about you?
First, I would say, forgive my voice. I am fighting a cold. I don't always sound this ragged. But I would like for people to know that I do see myself as a servant leader with an emphasis on the servant, that I'm in this because I do have fire in my belly to give back. I do believe that I am who I am because of how my parents raised me, where my parents raised me, and from the influences that others in this community have had on my life. There are many people who have been very gracious and very giving to me. And I do believe that it takes a village. I believe that the children are our future. I believe that if I'm going to be worried about who's going to take care of me when I'm older, whether it's in my home or in a nursing home or wherever, I want that person to be skilled. I want that person to be educated.
Yes.
I want the people who move into positions in government, in our companies, you name it. I want those people to be educated. I want them to be well-rounded. I want them to be inclusive. I want them to believe that together we're stronger than we are separately. I believe all those things. And I believe that the only way you can have those things happen is to have people in positions who will make those things happen, who believe that the greater good is always better than what the good is for me, who believe that if we have a more educated, a more healthy society, that it costs each of us less. If really you want to lower taxes, then you want to make sure that your community is healthy. You want to make sure that folk are educated such that they have the potential to achieve their goals through jobs or whatever, so that they don't have to victimize other folk, so we don't have to spend inordinate amounts of money for public safety and that sort of thing. I mean, all of those things should be jointly fit together. And if you don't know that about me, that's what I would want you to know, that my background in public service, my background in law enforcement, and my background as a mother, as a community leader, does make me uniquely qualified to continue to serve, because I do have the experience. I do have a knowledge base about a number of things, and I have established relationships with folk who are already in the General Assembly who respect me enough that they will at least include my bill as a provision in one of theirs. So there you have it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator Foushee.
Yeah.
Valerie,
Thank
to
you.
you, Phil.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
And to
you.
all of my constituents.
That's right.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.